So hopefully some of what we went through yesterday stuck with you guys a little bit, and we'll get some more practice in today, more use of the system, and then we can get into some of those issues on custom modeling that you want to look at later on today. So I'm just gonna start us where we left off here in the EX4 macro. So looking at what kind of stuff you can do in here. Now, you may recall me talking about this. This is what we call our industry macro. So pretty much any of the by industry modeling that we do in the forecast period is included in this this component, or in this macro for modifying. So standard stuff at the top, you got your version control here, and then your macro parameters. Now I showed you, we were looking at using the CAP, Canadian Association of Petroleum Producer forecast for the oil production at one time. So that's the reason these bases are up at the top here.
I think you need to, did you intend to show us your screen here,
oh,
Aaron?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Here we go. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, you should be able to see the EX4 industry macro now. Hopefully that's on your screens, because there's sometimes a lag.
It's up there now, yes.
Okay, great. So let's get going here. Okay, so standard stuff at the top. We have that version control component, just giving you that 202 in this case, because it's the model version 202. We have all of our macro parameters reading in from the CAP. This is the oil. We have the oil production data in here, but I think we're hard coding it because you guys do not have this file structure on your computers, so that wouldn't work anyways if we were to try and access it. And we then have the dates, all of our date commands. So these should coincide with what was available historically, i.e., if the LFS is available to 2019 historically, these are the extension date ranges in this macro. So you should typically be the year after known historical data should be the start date for any of these date ranges. And of course, these will all be updated by us each round and provided, so you guys shouldn't have to mess around with them. Unless you're doing custom data updates, that is, then you'll have to look at these. Just make sure you're going after you're operating in the right date range as you go forward here. So every macro, of course, has the close all databases, because we want to make sure that we're starting fresh every time a macro is run. Whether you were to run this macro by itself or run it, consecutively in order when you're solving the system, we always put a close command at the very top of every macro. Open up the history database, in this case, the MN, that will be filled in with that 202 from the Prover up here at the top, the macro parameter. That's the name of our history database. We then set our dates, and we're off here with all these variables. So a lot of all kinds of stuff in here. These are just switches, employment residual. That's the summation of the industry employment, just to make sure there is no residual, so that you get the LFS to add up the total. If there was some type of residual, again, res variables, they're all just residuals that we extend through the forecast period. Next section here is all your capital depreciation rates. So these are computed in the fixed capital stocks and flows data, and we just assume that they are constant going forward by industry. We next have the capital output ratio growth. So these are all set at 0 in our system. These would generally be used for technological adjustments for the models. So here I am in the EQN file again, just show you one of the equations. So therefore, it would modify. They are set to 0, as I said, but you would modify how much capital would be required here. Therefore, adjusting your investment requirements. So that's all that's really about. And we typically don't make any specific adjustments with them unless we had to do some type of modeling on that front. But they are available, and they're there if you need them. Okay, so one of the areas that you'll probably be working with more frequently here is the investment tuning components. So these are all what we call the ZI variables. They're investment tuning by sector. And as you notice, we have sort of a layered version of them. So you can adjust all investment up and down, whatever way you want through this general adjustment, which you can see gets into every single sector in this case, except we do leave the government out of the general adjustment. So it's more of it's a business sector investment, general adjustment, I should say. And secondly, we would then have the individual industry adjustments. So what happens here is when you put the general adjustment plus the sector specific adjustment, you get the aggregate adjustment, which then goes into the model investment equations here by industry. So that's the idea. This allows you to push your investment levels around. Now you'll notice the investment equation is largely driven by expected sales assumptions. So obviously this thing, the equation does not predict recessions for that reason, because it relies on historical trends and so forth on investments. So, but the concept is, as the economy is heating up, you get higher investment through the equation, and vice versa if you're seeing a slowdown in GDP growth, for example. So that's really what it is. It's trying to capture that trend in the GDP there. So that we call that expected sales. But on top of that, of course, you have your general adjustments, and these typically you end up putting a lot stronger ones on in cases when you're modeling major projects. And that's because there's a historical transition from sort of known data to unknown data. And we can look at that probably later on today when we get into, we'll do some examples after we look at the major project system. But in general, all you got to know here is that this is where you would tune your industry investment. And going down, then we also have, of course, the public sector.
Sorry, Aaron, can I just ask a question about the investment?
Yeah, jump in anytime, Thomas.
Great. So let's say there was an investment that was coming down the pipeline, right? And let's say, just, for simplicity's sake, let's say it's in the food manufacturing industry. So you've shown us how you would adjust, the growth rate for that particular industry. And I'm just wondering how it kind of interacts with sales for that industry. So if you know that this investment is going to be in, this particular industry, maybe down to the 6-digit NAICS code, and then you anticipate a bump in sales from this particular industry, would you also have to build that into the model as well, or does it automatically just kind of compute that?
Well, what we would do, we do evaluation when we do the major projects. So we try to get as much information as possible on every project we model. In the case of an electric power plant, we want to know how many megawatts it's adding. We would then use the base year price per megawatt. So the 2012 price per megawatt, you could then figure out your gross output, take the industry value added share in electric power, and then you would get your GDP level. So that we work backwards and figure out a valuation process for each project. In the case of a food plant, you got to know what they're making. Maybe, I think what did Manitoba have more recently? It was that I can't remember the project. There's a couple major food facilities that were developed, but we try to look at what their output is and get an idea. And if we can't get quantities, commodity information, or like if, for example, say it was a pea plant, green peas, right? You're not going to be able to get that type of information. What's the market price for green peas? I don't know. But so what you can do in that case is look at, you can calculate GDP backwards using industry productivity. And then if you know the operational employment, you can take average productivity for the sector, multiply it times the operational employment, and that would give you your GDP numbers, right? So that there's different methods you can use valuation procedure, and we can go through some of these examples. And then, if you guys are ever doing this type of stuff and need some help, you send us a note, because we do it all the time. We're always dealing with, and we also model projects, hundreds of projects across the country. where we're always doing these types of valuations. So we're pretty good at figuring out a way of getting some type of GDP estimate for these facilities, depending whatever sector they're in. So
Good stuff. Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
so we can look at that stuff. Okay, so of course you have your public sector as well here, and generally these are tuned. If you look at the equation, we're really just overriding what comes out of the system based on the government capital plan. Now, in the case of education and health, this goes back to our conversation yesterday a little bit, that their investment in education and the health sectors also include the private component of that. So in the case of health, for example, so you can use this invest non-res P table here. We put the dash P in there. That implies because we put the project value in this table. And this is very important for what we do, whether you have a project, but every industry, we put this project investment line just to see whether there is a major project. It really just helps, of course, with your tuning to know, especially when you have a multi-billion-dollar mountain of investment coming. You want to know what is the what's the first difference from year to year in the change in that investment, so you can sort of build your aggregate profile based on what you would have there for that project, for example. So we go down here. Here's a little a one-off paper project. Some of these we don't tune for directly. Like what I mean by this is fixed capital stocks flows data. It is known to 2018 in this version that we're looking at of the model. So what you need to do here in our first tuning year, which would be 2019, is figure out, was there investment from a project in 2018? Now the model doesn't read that information in. So what we do is you open the project database and you can look at these values, and I'll show you how you do that, because what you're really trying to figure out is, say there was 18 million in project investment that year, that's largely accounting for the whole sector's investment then, in that case, because you had $19 million in investment that year. So you're trying to see, is there really a jump from zero? Is there an $18 million increase? Should I be going up to 37 million 37 million in the next year or not? So you have to look at this first year transition issue. That's why it's a bit of an art as you go through this stuff. You can look at, the utility sector is a big one for you guys. So clearly this is the kiosk dam really doing this stuff, the kiosk and the bipole projects. So there were multi-billion dollars, and you can see how you used to be back at around $1 billion back in the day, and then you came along and you built that mega dam, spiked up almost $2 billion, peaking at almost 3 billion here, and then you start coming down the mountain. So you can actually look at this information. It does exist in our project database, but we don't read it in because it can mess with the equations historically. So you can just look at that value in the major project space. So I'll just give you a quick example here. I open up the base and I look at the variables IT, UT, and then that's the only variable like that. But so here was all this historical investment from our projects. I mean, this has been a long-going project, as you can see. So in 18, there was actually $1 billion in project investment. That's what that says. So when you can see in that table the 1457 in 2019, but you can't see that $1 billion in 2018. So,
Aaron, sorry, I have a question there again.
Yeah, no problem.
And this goes back to my question or comment yesterday on energy supply and demand. So
okay.
when you're looking at the utility sector, right, and you've shown that we have this spike in investment that is due to the kiosk dam, right?
Yes.
And then once that dam is complete, there's a tapering off of investment within that sector. At some point, once that dam comes online, there's going to be an oversupply of electricity in the province, and that excess capacity will be exported. But
yes.
Eventually, just with population growth and economic growth, we're going to require more energy. So some of those exports could be consumed domestically. But at some point, we're going to maximize the generation capacity of that generating station as well, and we'll
Right.
need new investment. So,
Correct.
like, how does that kind of fit into the model there?
Well, the model on its own will develop its own investment through the investment equations. As you have sector growth and so forth, it tries to generate new capital on its own. So we're here, you can see the net change in capital right here, this line. There is continual capital formation in here. Keep in mind, this isn't just electric power. This is all your sewage and all kinds of other utility infrastructure being developed here. But the idea here is that you just want to capture the major lumps, do your best job you can on driving the non-residential investment. So the model, it also includes the sustaining investment component in it, and that's why we're dealing with all the depreciation rate aspect of it. So you're right, the model will generate some new power development. In terms of modeling all those exports and import flows of electricity, now that's incredibly difficult. We've tried to do some work on that for Manitoba because but we have, and I have looked at some of that historical data, and it fluctuates significantly, your trade of electric power based on what's going on in the US, and because obviously that's who you sell it all to, other than stuff coming around Ontario potentially. But it really, there's a major variance there, so it's incredibly difficult to try and model that stuff without watching the, I'm not sure if you can even get access to good real-time information on that, current information on the sales. Thomas, you're muted.
I was just agreeing with you that detailed sales by the day or by the minute, that's not available in Manitoba like it is in some other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I know. We would love to be able to do that, but it's incredibly difficult. So, but of course, if you wanted to, you could control that type of work with our trade table at the end here. So the way this table is set up, we should actually break it apart because it's so long now because we have so many sectors. But the first half of this table is exports, and at least you can at least see the electric power exports here. So this is all collected or developed from the commodity data that we do collect. So when I told you we collect that commodity information and then we allocate it to an industry space, that procedure gets you these estimates. So we're not just making that stuff up, let's put it that way. But then the lower half of this table is where the imports are. I think this is a project we should do, is to separate export and imports. So you don't have to pan for forever here to get to the right component. But as you can see, the imports are significantly very, very small in this case. And most of you got hundreds of millions in electric power sales, in real terms, of course. So yeah, there's definitely some challenges with modeling that stuff, but at least with the projects, we're capturing the flavor that we are trying to look for with the major $100 million shifts in the flow. So remember, that was about $1.1 billion. Sorry. So we're looking at a bit of an uptick here. We don't always go, it's not a 1-for-1. You know what I mean? If the project's going up by 300 million, we don't just make an absolute adjustment of 300 million because you have other components to the sector. So what we're trying to do, this is the art part here. We're trying to get some representation. Obviously, as the kiosk spends or peaks in its spending in 2019, we were trying to get some upflow, and then you can see the number then coming off as we come down the mountain again. Some other stuff going on here. I think this is some of the wastewater stuff going in up around Winnipeg there, and then we come off again more so. But ultimately, you can see that you were spending about 1.1 billion back in 2012. So it generally comes down to a new higher level after building that project. So that's sort of what this is about. The reason we're putting in these projects and trying to capture that profile there. And then you always have your base level estimated down here. So this is your replacement investment, i.e. what needs to be spent to sustain your current infrastructure, given that we're using a 7.2% depreciation rate last year's capital stock. So that's all this is. So therefore, that you put these two together, or you put that together in last year's stock, which is on this line, multiply that times that, you'll get that number. And if you do not invest enough, you'll see deformation here, which we do get in some industries. So that's how this table is incredibly helpful for tuning your investment in that sense, right? And obviously through the pandemic and so forth, we can go down to accommodation and food, for example, and here we have some deformation occurring for several years because we got a 55% reduction here in the investment level this year. We use the building permits data to help guide this a bit, and it has varied significantly, but it's not perfect data. You'll sometimes see about an 80% reduction in the permit values this year to date, or something like that. It depends really by province. That we've had crazy fluctuations, but we're really just trying to capture some flavor here on what happens and then how this sector could recover to get the right signals. So that's essentially what you're doing with this investment tuning stuff and how you incorporate the projects. But we can work on that a little bit later. Okay, so the next section after your investment.
All right, Mustafa has a question. I keep on seeing him raising his hand here. Good morning, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, it's basically. Sorry, I came late because I have to drop my son to the school.
No problem.
I just want to know, it's the extension of Thomas' question about the utility thing. It's include all the utilities so far. I understood. My question is, as you have shown that the trade table, it has separate things. So is it possible to build a model specifically for electricity or some other things?
Certainly. What kind of a model are you talking about? We used to help Edmonton Power, for example, build load forecasting models. If you're talking about that type of stuff, demand for electricity.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, that we have been involved in those type of models in the past. I assume Manitoba Hydro probably has their own department that does that kind of stuff, though.
Okay.
You need a lot of special data to build those types of models. So it's
yeah, that's why I was just curious to know, because I previously I was reviewed a little bit of Hydro's model from their end, not from our end. So I was just curious to know that. Thank you, though.
Yeah, I was involved in that about 10 years ago. We haven't done a lot of that work since. I think we helped EPCOR, which is now Capital Power, up in the Edmonton area. We used to visit them pretty regularly and assist. But those were my younger years, so I was just an assistant at that time. Wasn't really directing that stuff, but my father was definitely involved in that stuff. He did some work for the Chinese government as well, helping them build load forecasting models. So we have a lot of that stuff sitting on the shelf somewhere.
Sounds like a South Park joke. Sorry, Rudy. No? Sorry.
Sounds like a South Park joke. Wow.
Integrity. That was like a thing. Never mind. Sorry.
Anyways, you can absolutely build load forecasting models if that's what you're interested in. It's I think there's lots of literature out there on them as well, and there's certainly some specialists in this country that do it day in and day out. So okay, so after the investment component here, we're moving into the labor market stuff. So this is just your productivity by sector. We have an aggregate, what we call the RPR, is our rate of productivity adjustment. And again, same type of stuff. This is your general productivity adjustment. Getting into all the industry productivity, you notice it looks exactly like the ZIs above, where you can control for individual industries. So here we would tune for our latest LFS data, where we think industry employment's going in a specific year, and what's happening to their productivity. But of course, keep in mind that whatever adjustment you're making here is being combined with that general adjustment as well. And then we also have sort of a base productivity assumption for these sectors as well. This is more, it's not necessarily to say that is what productivity growth is. It's more of a calibration coefficient in this case to just get it to grow properly with the GDP. But this is generally where you would tune your employment numbers by sector. So the next bit we get into here is the trade. So these are the import adjustments. Now we have we isolate the two. We have one for the goods and one for the services. So if I highlight the goods adjustment here and we pan down, of course, you're going to see the ag sector, the other primary industries, utilities, manufacturing are all getting the goods adjustment. And then we get into the service sectors, and obviously the other way around, you're going to be dealing with this. So these are just general adjustments to push goods and services around. Obviously there isn't perfect data available to tune every single one of these industries as we're dealing with commodity information at Strategic or Industry Canada, and it's not very timely either. So the best we can really collect in terms of real-time information is on the manufacturing shipment data, which is produced on a monthly basis, but it's still about 3 months behind because I think Export Development Canada or at least StatCan has to compile that information. So all you're trying to do here, of course, is make assumptions about how trade is moving this year or next, whatever you're trying to do. If you know something about a major hit to the softwood lumber sector, something like that, you can account for those changes here, looking at the import adjustments. But as you can see, we don't do a whole lot on the import front. We generally let the domestic sales equations drive the industry import data. So you can see there are not a lot of custom adjustments here, unless something we did know was occurring in a specific year, or we assumed something was happening. But generally, we only work with the aggregate adjustment for these components, just to try and get, it's really more about pushing the GDP around in the right direction, or making some general assumptions. And you can see that we're not really differentiating the services versus the goods. We typically just let the model run the import sector. So in general.
I have a question about that. Do you find that could be an anomaly with this year, not focusing on services, separating the two because of COVID?
Well, certainly, yeah. If you know something about it, you can control for it.
I was hoping you knew.
Well, we work with what's available as well. So
yeah,
this just goes back to assumptions.
We get within the detailed expenditure file. We'll get 4 interprovincial services for 4 interprovincial, 4 international services for exports and imports. So we have to make some crazy guesses on those, and you can't really use history for this particular year. So sorry, yeah, that's it. So I was gonna maybe go through your model to see if I could steal something. But,
right. Well, I mean, let's look at the aggregate here. Of course, the domestic sales are down this year, so imports are collapsing. They're falling almost 7%. In the key analysis table here. So, I mean, you can look at the components of that to figure out what's really happening by sector, but that's kind of what you're getting out of that. So,
and these are in real dollars, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Which is funny because because of that when you have weaker imports, that it's like it almost cancels each other out.
Of course. Yeah. Well, that's what it has done, right?
Yeah.
Or depending on the relative size of them as well. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we've been telling. We go around presenting our forecast. Yeah. It's a consumption as well as an export-led recession.
Yeah.
But why bother getting into the imports? Because you're presenting to non-economists. It's you just confuse the matter, and you start looking at net exports. Then it just becomes it takes an analyst and a lot of time. So. We try to keep it as simple as possible, but that's really what the story has been, is that And you know, and on the consumption reduction, it isn't so much on the household side because we've all been given so much free money that we're actually seeing retail sales fully recover, and we may end up with positive numbers by the end of the year, based on if you look at the retail sales monthly data and extrapolate. Even if you held them constant, I think at what we have right now, I actually have the numbers right here. I could show you.
Wouldn't you see that like investment should potentially slow down because of like business confidence and not having that capital kind of available because they are in debt?
That's exactly what's going on, right? I mean, you have retail sales is up, but the point I was trying to make here is that this is business input reductions.
Yeah.
That's what this is. This isn't, you know, people forget, say consumers, you think of it just me and the next door neighbor buying stuff at the store. This is all businesses have stopped cleaning services for their offices. Like I know I have, not buying as many paper towels and toilet paper and all that kind of stuff. Hand washing soap. Well, I mean, from my house I am, but that kind of stuff, right? It's businesses just aren't buying the inputs anymore. So that's where this consumer expenditure reduction is coming from. At least I think so, because the retail sales data certainly is not showing this type of negativity at all.
I thought motor vehicle sales were down substantially. That
they are, but I mean, look at the relative size, right? You know, 1.2 billion out of your 37 billion.
Yeah.
Right. Or sorry, to look at last year, but still, you get the point. It's they are down pretty heavily, but relative size wise, the big impacts. It's services. Services are where you're taking the hit, right? This is other services where you're getting the big drop.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing's happened on the rent so much. We haven't really done a lot with that, but this is the big one here. You know, that's a third of your economy right there, third of your consumption. Sorry.
Wow.
Almost. Maybe I'm exaggerating a tad, but you know.
No. All good.
Anyways, okay, so whatever your feelings are, you can control for them in this model. So it's up to you to tune to your heart's content. So after the imports, moving into the export side, same type of thing. We're differentiating the goods from the services. And here we have stronger views, as you can see, trying to sort of, push those exports down a little bit this year, because the trading partner equation wasn't driving it to the extent we wanted. And then, of course, tuning for that recovery. So you really just got to play with the equations. They're not perfect, of course. So particularly this year, it really needs some additional help. We've never had to tune this far out before. Let's put it that way, except for through COVID. And then, of course, as you move down, we do have some more assumptions about this stuff. So what we have here now, you may recall me mentioning the Industry Canada data for this model was available to 2016. And we just got the 2017 data a few months ago. My guys are working on updating it right now, and that will be in the January version of the model. But what we try to do is we compare our exports to what's occurred with GDP in these past few years, just so we can get sort of a level alignment here. So we actually have a table for this. I think it's in here, export tuning MN in this case. So here we are, we're looking at what happened to GDP, what was the percent change in GDP last year? Again, we only know the data to 16, remember? And you can see that these don't necessarily move together at all. There's all kinds of fluctuations in our predicted data, but remember that these are synthetic exports as well. So what we're trying to do here is sort of get some direct. If GDP spiked, we should probably see exports pick up, and vice versa. As you go forward here. So the GDP is known to 2019, the exports are known to 2016. So we're trying to sort of get that directional flavor for the last 3 unknown years before we start the forecast. And that's just so we don't get the levels off massively. It also allows us to capture situations where like maybe a major component of an industry shut down within these 3 missing historical years. So we have cases in like New Brunswick where they completely ceased smelting operations in the province. So the industry went to 0 on their primary metals, and you want to be watching for that type of stuff. So that's really what this is about, and why we have adjustments for 17, 18, 19 for all sectors. From there on, we then add a second line, and this is where you can deal with the forecast year, making assumptions about industry sales or export growth, shipment information in that case, right? So you can look at, you guys probably have better data than we do, but you can look at current commodity information on grain shipments, that type of stuff, or wood product sales, just to drive. Well, this would obviously be raw logs. But if we do have strong opinions about this stuff, we would come in here and control for individual sector trade through this stuff. So here's the metal mining. So the shutdown of the Reed copper mine and the Birch Tree nickel mine. So we try to do a bit of valuation work there. 6,000 tons per year in nickel, 150 jobs. So we looked at the first difference and tried to account for those types of changes. So we're doing this type of stuff all day, every day. For every province, right? Looking by sector, trying to capture major events that occurred on an industry basis, based on whatever intelligence we can get, usually out of the media. Again, then in 22, you got your shutdown of your 777 mine up in Flin Flon, and that kind of stuff here. And then some more notes there about the La Lore mine as well. So trying to account for these industry trade or adjustments or changes in gross output in this case, right? So your forecast is only as good as your research, I guess. Okay, so when you get to this, you can ignore this next section because this is the skip to command. I don't know if David, you ever remember seeing these, but all this does is allow you to shut off a section of the model. So I say skip to next. The next is irrelevant. I could call this Fred. It doesn't matter. And then down, as I go down, I could put Fred in here. And it just it'll just jump, basically skip all of that information. It won't read it. So it just shuts this off. This is when we were doing some detailed barrel production modeling for the NEB. Looking at their views, but we are using the cap forecast in this case. So somewhat insignificant for Manitoba's overall outlook, of course, because the sector being so small on oil production. But we do a lot of energy modeling stuff for them. So as you get past that component, we get into the conventional oil and gas industry here. So this is our rate of exports, we call it. It's the growth rate assumption on where oil and gas conventional production is going. And in this case, you can see we're taken from the CAP database. So that's our light and medium oil in barrels per day data. We compute the percent change in that, call it XX oil. We then take the last value of known exports and drive it like that production profile. So that's the type of stuff you can do here if you want to exogenize certain sectors. And oil's the only one we ever do this type of stuff for, really. Oil and gas, I mean. And then the rest of the goods, they just keep going here. So we got the utilities. I think this 21. This might be, I feel like this is probably an adjustment related to the startup of some of the kiosk electric power development. Maybe the model wasn't picking up the right, or the valuation wasn't necessarily correct. Whatever was happening, that's the type of stuff that's being controlled for there. This is likely related to some of those food plants. I can just go, let me just grab the project stuff. So here's our major project inventory for Manitoba. So within the manufacturing industry, this was it. Okay, so you had your yellow pea processing plant that just finished, has probably started this year, maybe in operation right now. What else we got? There was a potato plant that completed construction last year, began this year. So you got a lot of food manufacturing facilities coming online in 2020, and some other investments as well. So a lot of these projects work with BuildForce Canada and all kinds of industry representatives that sit on those committees, try to help us out with the timing and so forth, because we do construction industry modeling, because they're obviously interested in, are they going to have enough construction workers to in the future, and help with their apprenticeship planning, that type of stuff. That's really what that project is about. We've been doing that for about 20 years now. So that's where a large source of our project inventory comes from. The rest, we're collecting it from media reports, that type of stuff, wherever we can, really. I don't think you guys have your government publishes a major project inventory, does it? You guys aware of anything like that?
No. Actually, having any sort of inventory on that type of work is pretty much, there's nothing out there. When you guys came out with this module, that's what really attracted us to this aspect of your model too, as well. So we really saw value not only in how it interacts with on the macro level, but also just giving us that inventory, that insight as to some of this work. We played around with some other stuff. David, I can't, if you can remember that stuff on the building permits or whatever, but there was no inventory.
Yeah, we had subscribed to something for about a year. I thought it was called BuildForce.
It was a US-based company that just looked at, but those weren't actual. Well, I guess there were projects that were looking to be put out for tender, so they would just capture that, and they actually had it down to a specific NAICS code and stuff like that.
Okay.
But that was not just major projects. That was like, putting a culvert in a municipality. Right. The question I was going to ask about this stuff is, like, if you're looking at this the major projects module, and just hypothetically, if the government said, "Oh, we want to look at," and maybe you're going to go through this exercise today, but I mean, if they're looking at say a $300 million project in one of these categories, I'm assuming that it would be in this area or in this module that we would sort of do that sort of that shock or that simulation, correct?
Correct. Yes. I would. Yeah. That's what it's built for. I would certainly do it in here.
So I just right now would just say, like, if there was and that's kind of where we see some of this value too as well. Like, we'll use our economic impact assessment model, right, for doing, evaluating a specific project and looking at labor income and direct and indirect impacts on GDP. But what value would this give us over something like the IO approach?
Well, you'll get inflation or price impacts. The IO has no, it has infinite supply of everything, basically. Yeah. Right. Okay. I mean, when you put in a project, you'll induce cost inflation on labor. You'll have some crowding out impacts, that type of stuff. So some offsets. Whereas the IO system is, the more you put in, the more you get out. It's a linear system, right? There is no everything is abundantly available. Whereas that's the whole point of really what you get out of a true macroeconomic model versus using input-output framework. We we read a lot about there's a lot of caveats there about using IO for economic impact analysis, right? Because of those problems, and particularly when the project ends, right? If you come off a cliff, a multi-billion-dollar project, and when you come down that mountain, there's a reverse impacts, right? That you can't capture through input output. So that's something that this model will do as well, right? So you get negative multipliers on the way down, as you do on positive multipliers on the way up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really good to know.
Yeah, no,
just a tidbit, but that company was called Construction Connect.
Right. Yeah, we look at them as well.
Yeah, and the big issue is that I think it's the timing would be like the most important thing, right? So if there is a major project, all there is that like initial permit value or whatever, and you don't know how long it's going to take before it goes online. So you can't really. There's no way to determine the length of the project.
Right.
So
there's stuff published pretty frequently.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where they get all their intelligence from. You know, one benefit that we have is that we work with the construction associations, the local ones on the ground, so they can tell us when projects are changing and throughout the year. We do this on for about 8 months of the year, each cycle. So we're getting pretty current information, right? And we know about potential delays and tendering problems and all sorts of issues. Whether they can get enough workers. They're having problems with heavy equipment mechanics or crane operators, things like that are causing delays in the investment expenditures. So we have a sort of ongoing intelligence that we collect through this stuff that we try to account for. So every 6 months you might see some shifts in these dates, changes in the values, changes in the investment distribution as well that we try to account for as time goes on. But
Yeah.
The best you can do is work with what the current plan is. So.
Yeah, and Mike, sorry, Mike, one more thing, or just in general, didn't you used to get an email that contained construction project announcements within government? Mike?
No. I put it this way: there's no quantitative
Okay.
set of data that really gives you any of this information. Some of it was this anecdotal announcements, either pulled from media sources or whatever, but it really is not, like I said, it's not a quantitative list of
Okay.
the value of these things and when these projects are, whether they're approved or not as well. So
this list is just somebody compiling news releases and not really whether or not it actually went to fruition or saying when it actually did.
yeah, Alberta does a very good job with theirs. They've actually mapped their investments out across regions, so you can not only see how much is occurring, you can tell where it's occurring based on its like sub-provincially. So Manitoba's they need to do their work.
Ontario is worse. So we have the Ontario Investment Service.
So bad now.
The biggest provinces are terrible. There's a lot of in-house fighting, and you can never get any good information. We work with Infrastructure Ontario, and they can't even tell us what the plan is. One year I was at the committee for the finance ministers meeting, and they're saying there's going to be a 30% increase in government capex this year, and all the bankers and us went after them on what? Do you have shovel-ready projects? What's going on? Year passed, and then the numbers came out, and there was a 1% increase. A lot of wishful thinking, and we've always had trouble with them. I think Ontario is probably one of our most challenging provinces for that reason. So don't feel bad. Always hard to predict investment, no matter where you are.
There's a difference between in-house, disputes or fighting between departments over information and just pure incompetency.
Yes, that's right. Oh, and political messages too. So political agendas make it sound nice, even though it may not happen. Okay. All right. So moving on. I mean, same type. I think you guys get. We're just whatever available. So you know, most of the stuff is on the goods industries. Obviously, the mining announcements and things like that can be accounted for pretty well. And we also collect things like, you know, on the mining side, information from Enercan, Natural Resources Canada, on your mineral statistics to try and get the valuations done properly on when these mines are lost in that case. So at least through that data, you can get revenue and quantity per data, and you can figure out base year prices. So it's helpful for your valuations. What else we got? So just more services, and then we end. What we end up doing as well, because our model runs out to 2050 on the trade side, we have what we call obviously the long-term export tuning. So here we're trying to model 2025 and on in this case. And in some cases, we make small adjustments to these general trend adjustments. So if you notice up here, all of these have sort of a factor on them where we're tuning those trade levels. So we basically chart all this stuff. We compare it to GDP and things like that, and we try to do some trend analysis on your trade. And then these are really just calibration variables on the equations. And then again, as we get into the longer term, we're doing the same process, just making sure that things aren't taking, because sometimes you can have impacts on you know, trading partner inflation differences. We get our long-term US price stuff out of the EIA's long-term energy outlook, which runs out to, I think it's out to 2060 now, maybe at least 2050. And yeah, as that changes from year to year, you know, you can have impacts on local cost. I showed you those export equations. You have the cost, basically your cost competitiveness component. It can obviously shift around, particularly as we're modeling out here over 30 years. So we try to account for those differences a little bit in the longer term, and make sure that the stuff doesn't go kind of wonky as you get out there. So there is a bit of a long-term section here as well. But we don't do specific year tuning, as you can see. We just set the general. It's just sort of to control the trend. What else we have? These are just import shares from the rest of Canada and the rest of the world, extending last values. And what they are is just the import proportion of growth for the industry. And then we also do this for, this is the investment share. This is that asset class stuff that I was talking about. So again, we're doing the engineering, construction, building construction, intellectual property, and then machinery and equipment would be the residual. Taking sort of the average of these. So there's different methods here, but that's all this is trying to do, is get that industry asset class, general industry asset class information extended into the forecast period. What this is actually doing is we're taking the mean of the historical data here. Now, this can sometimes be problematic, but some of these are relatively stable. And that's really because in some years, sometimes in the last known year, you get a major shift in the number. So what's actually happening here, this is a partial adjustment equation, and it's bringing the last value in that share back over time to that mean value at a rate of 0.25 of the difference per year. So you end up, if you look at one of these shares in engineering construction, for example, if I look at IAG ECS, I believe. That's all that's doing. So it took the historical average, and then it'll try to bring it back over time using that partial adjustment equation. We also have some custom ones we're setting here, and a bit of the work on the M&E. So this is all just built into that. This is more for what we do for build force, but also for getting the right hits on the right sectors, whether that be buildings to drive the construction industry, or M&E driving manufacturing demand. that type of stuff. This is all the maintenance and repair data stuff down here. You don't have to play with any of this. What else do we have? So this is our energy use, that IO stuff, so electric power usage, and you can see these are in the industries. Nobody's really, these are the miscellaneous sectors, well, other than nonprofits, but those operating in cafeteria supplies ones, the transportation margins, entertainment and travel, that kind of stuff. So not really even worth looking at so much. Again, same stuff here. This is where we're just looking at those energy use coefficients. The NEM is your non-energy materials, your oil. In this case, we have I guess a bitumen one, and other energy use coefficients that come out of the input-output tables. All that stuff just being extended, flatlined through the forecast period. Then we're just setting some value-added shares. And that is about it. And then this is just a big Z variable initialization. When I say initialize, it just means set it to 0.
Aaron, before we
Yes.
leave this section here, could you scroll back up to maybe the manufacturing sector? I just want to make sure that I'm kind of correctly interpreting this code, because it sounds like we are going to be making any modifications to the forecast. This is kind of the section in which we would do that. So if you could kind of just take one, like food manufacturing, for example, could you just kind of walk me through what all of these codes mean?
Sure. Okay. So again, here we're tuning for trying to align to historical GDP for those exports. So this, I'll just go back to that export tuning concept. We will do this for you guys each round. You don't have to, unless you have assumptions about, obviously maybe we missed something that happened. We don't have access to industry data, but all we're trying to do there is look at, again, the export data, the synthetic export data, I'll say synthetic, is known to 2016 at this point, and we know the GDP to 2019. So these are the growth rates we're looking at. So clearly GDP was on the up for these 2 years. So we're just trying to make the exports move in line here. As you can see, we try to get the sort of the flavor of where growth has been going under the assumption that exports moved in line with aggregate gross output. So that's your first line. Secondly, this is more about making adjustments for your forecast period, right? From 2020 and on. That's where we start the GDP forecast in this case. So given that there were all, there's no note here, but I can absolutely guess this is because of all those food manufacturing facilities that went online. So what I'm assuming here is that between the Rocket Frères and the JR Simplo, our valuation on GDP. So we have methods here. This is where we do the GDP in this last column here. So there's different ways of doing it. When we use what we call the E method, this takes our operational employment assumption here, which you can directly enter in this column. So according to information, we learned that there were going to be 150 workers at this plant once it got started, and 90 at the other one. So it will take productivity from industry 3114, but unfortunately the productivity is an average of that entire industry, right? So it may not be representative of your output per person. So you multiply those operational jobs times productivity. That's what the setting here is trying to do, and it'll give you your GDP valuation there. So as you can see, we typically use the E method as much as possible for a lot of these projects, but in cases where like there's the kiosk up here, we would then do a valuation where we could take the price for a megawatt back in 2012 and multiply it times the quantity of output.
Okay.
Maybe accounting for changes in other facilities being shut down as well because of how much power is going to come out of that the kiosk dam. So that's the kind of stuff we're trying to do here. But you can either do your valuations independently and enter them directly, or you can just try to use a more simple method to get some type of GDP impact from these projects turning on. So there's different ways to do it.
I have a question. Could when do you guys factor in manufacturing shipments in this at all for your?
We do,
even,
yes. David, that's the one problem is that the manufacturing shipment date is nominal, so it's got price impacts in there as well.
Yes. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So you need some sort of
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you got to know everything. You got to know what's happening with machinery prices and on average, and that type of stuff. If you're dealing with that, I mean, I have here. I can show you here's the.
It's good to know what not to do. So as much
right,
as
but you just gotta know what the data means, right? So here's the manufacturing sales data. This is our year-to-date number. So we haven't updated the September numbers yet in this spreadsheet, but you can see food has been up 15% this year to date, right? And if we have a method here, if you flatline it for the rest of the year, you could actually be at 17% increase by the end of 2020, if you guys can read this table.
Yeah.
Right? I know it's pretty small on your screen. So we build systems to look at, and we collect this stuff as frequently as possible, just to help drive our current year outlook as best we can here by sector. But again, manufacturing is where you get the most information. Currently, StatCan doesn't produce services, for example, trade and services data. There's nothing to work with on that front. You could dissect the commodity data at Strategis, but it's got too much of a lag in it. So you really just have to sometimes let the model drive the trade equations because it's just unknown otherwise.
Okay, thanks.
So again, that's all we're trying to do here, Thomas.
Yeah, so just so I'm reading this correctly, so in 2017, the growth rate that you've kind of estimated here or computed is 3%, and then 2018 it's 4%, and then you have a decline of 7% in 2019.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Correct? This is an adjustment factor. So if I turn this off, for example, and run the system, you'll see that these growth rates are going to shift by those amounts pretty much, right? So you end up seeing, like, for example, let's look at the first year. We had a 3% positive adjustment in 2017. So without that 3%, this might be closer to 0. So whether we actually need that or not, I mean, that's all we're trying to do there. It's not that
I see.
This isn't. We're not setting the growth rate at that. We're just trying to get this to align somewhat. And again, this goes back to the level issue. So when I go to the trade table in food products, for example, see, at least this way we're getting some positivity in we'll look at 2017, but we're trying to make it move with GDP somewhat. And I'm just saying that this process is important for cases where you have maybe a doubling of an industry, right? Yeah. Which would be reflected in the GDP data, but not in the export data unless you put it in.
Right. So you're trying to create a consistent story.
Correct.
Right.
Exactly.
Across all of your variables.
For these 3 unknown years where we know GDP, but we do not know trade. So that's all we're trying to do there. So like I said, it's very important if an industry shuts down, for example, right? If that sector was eliminated in 2017, GDP went to 0, we would miss that if we did not do this, right? You can still have trade showing up. So you gotta control for that kind of stuff, and that's why we do this procedure. So these can be whatever's required, right? That's all it's about. But then when you get into the first year of the forecast, given that I see 2020 is only showing about 4% increase in food products, and this is obviously because we're getting probably domestic sales hits, given. So maybe the trade is down slightly, but who knows? It's manufacturing shipment data certainly isn't, but we have price impacts as well built into this information. And we know that I think food prices have been going up this year, according to the CPI, as I recall, given that we're all demanding too much of it now. So it's just things to consider. A lot of stuff to factor in here when you're doing this stuff. You know, whether you're looking at current information, and you just got to make sure know that there's price impacts built into this stuff. So it is not a real quantity increase of 15%. So that's all. You know, you can impose your views. That's what this is really about, and we do our best to try and get whatever we know, whatever intelligence we have by industry, right? And then, of course, as you can see going forward, the food sector is still doing pretty well. A lot of growth. You know, I tell this industry story all the time that are one of the major growth industries in this country. The model's developing that. I think there's demand for it. There's commodity price increases, real commodity price gains expected.
People got to eat, right?
Right.
They don't necessarily need to buy a car, but they're always going to have to eat.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
And there's real profit gains expected according to World Bank price forecasts, which are also stimulating some of this stuff. So it's you know, it's not a big wonder why they're building all these mega processed food facilities and that kind of stuff. I'm seeing a lot of French fry factories going in on the East Coast too. Okay, so is that okay?
Yep.
You know, the more you play with it, you'll see what we're up to here. But that's really the concept here. Okay, we can move into the EX5 now. Right. So here this is the government macro EX5. It says federal government, but I don't know. It's got everything in here: provincial, local, Aboriginal, all the adjustments for tuning the government sector. We have things like the large and small corporate tax rates, retail sales tax. Those are the key tax rates in the model right now. And I did some research last night as to how we could help you with that education tax stuff you're interested in. So we can talk about that maybe as we go through this. Also, retail sales tax, as I said. We also have just some GDP date ranges, the provincial economic accounts. We always call these the DPEA ones. So these are, you know, all these are just extension date ranges. We also control for the carbon tax modeling in this macro, the pricing, and I'll show you when we get down to that section, and also the emissions model that I showed you yesterday. The dates are controlled in here for the key drivers of that system. So we start off with the federal government. Basically, the order of this model is federal revenues, federal expenditures, provincial revenues, provincial expenditures, and so on down the levels of government. So it's pretty orderly. So here you're just dealing with all your different effective tax rates, you know, taking the historical values, making adjustments on them. All kinds of components, manufacturers' share of corporate taxes versus non-manufacturers, adjustment ratios on the federal corporate tax rate. So here we had this is the federal business tax rate adjustment ratio. So this was trying to tune up some of the federal stuff. Basically, you know, you can go through the government section of the model and all the drivers in here, the effective rates, the ratios that are applied, it can all be dealt with here. But unless there are any announced changes in the federal budget, we don't really modify a lot of this stuff. But as you can see on the right-hand side, in some cases, these are Canada variables, CA here. Oops, I shouldn't have done that. I messed it all up. I have a problem with my syntax highlighting on this text editor, but these are coming out of the Canadian model, our Canadian model. So we would, you know, we check the federal budget and then we adjust for them in the Canadian model. The variables are then read into all the provinces. So it gives us a centralized location to control for these things. But if you did want to make assumptions about them, you know, you can just pop in right above this equation and put an update command, for example, and do whatever you want to it, right? and then you will have overwritten that value. It would then get used once you make the computation next. So there's ways for you guys to make changes to any of this stuff if our stuff is out of line or not of your views, whatever you think. Here we have the GST rate. I'm not sure what we're up to there. I have to look at that one. So basically, anything you want to adjust on the government side on the Fed's revenue will be in this block. On their expenditures, same type of stuff. A lot of sort of transfers and inventory stuff through here, where again, you know, we did our modeling on the CERB allocation and so forth in the Canadian model as well. I think that's on. There's your transfers to business. So this one we're giving a big injection in 2020. You can see here that's I think it's an 800% increase on the adjustment because the numbers just went crazy this year with all the federal wage subsidy. Moving down, I believe, where are the transfers to households, for example? Anyways, we can look at this stuff later if you're interested, but we've tried to account for all of our modeling on the federal wage subsidy transfers. We've extrapolated the monthly data that the feds have made available and through federal finance. And we've also done that with the CERB on the government transfers to persons. I believe this is it here. Right, okay, so this variable was adjusted in the Canadian model. This is probably just propping up some stuff on its own. So you can't actually see this. But if we do look at, for example, federal table, so we have our GovFed, GovProv, GovLocal, and CPP, and the Aboriginal government tables here. So you can pop into any one of these. Do I have the, oh yeah, the accounts only go back to 2007. So, for example, direct taxes have collapsed, and that's because we've had so many job losses this year. So federal tax rates, federal tax revenue has collapsed. Lots of problems there. This is related to the consumption equation, driving down GST revenues, carbon tax revenues. So you can look at all this stuff. You guys have the federal backstop in play here. So these are based on the carbon prices and those quantities of emissions in megatons. This is what we are predicting for carbon tax revenue. So it typically, of course, it won't align with what you guys may publish in your budget because we're on a calendar year here where you guys would be in fiscal. So you would have to convert those numbers to make sense here. And where are my transfers to persons? Personal transfers, no, that's not right. On the expenditure side. So there you go. So on the other transfers to persons, based on our estimates, the way we've done this is we've extrapolated what the total CERB and then we've also done the EI component as we transitioned to the employment insurance for the last few months of the year here. So we've done that work trying to get some numbers, and we've allocated the CERB household transfers on a per capita basis across the country. And looking at the level of unemployment that has arisen, but it's I think we did it on a per capita basis because the unemployment has rates have participation factored into them. You know, as we've seen people leave the labor force as they got their CERB payments, so the unemployment rates didn't go as high as they could have in the summer months because of people exiting the labor force. You know, we saw part rate drops of up to, I think it was up to about 5% in some cases. You can look at some of those numbers. We have our monthly part rates here. So you guys went from almost 67 down to 62 at its low in April So quite a huge drop in the part rate. So anyway, so that's just backing up my point here. But we allocated all that CERB money on a per capita basis. So the assumption here was that you guys are getting an extra just over $6.5 billion in household.
What would all be included in that bump in transfers to persons in addition to CERB? Because I think the CERB portion to Manitobans is between 2 and 2.5 billion. So if you're estimating, over 6 billion, where's the additional money coming from?
Is that the estimate for the year, or just what's been given so far?
Well, would they not be the same? Because CERB ended, right?
Right. I'm not sure if the data is all available. We'll have to review that, and we will be doing that. What is important? Well, of course, this drives the income side of the model. So let me tell you how this works. When we started transferring these funds, what happened in the model? Personal income skyrocketed. And where do the personal income equations go? They go into the consumer spending equations. So of course we had huge changes in our consumption categories once we started inputting all these this additional income. So basically what we ended up doing was having to offset that through those ZC adjustments in the EX2 macro. So really, what's important here, for your real economic forecast, it depends what you're trying to do here. Are you trying to play finance minister and get the federal balance sheet correct, or are you trying to get your real economic forecast correct? So there's a balance there in how the system works, right? So whether this is right or wrong has no impact on the real economic outlook right now. But if we were to change it, we would have to recalibrate all the consumer spending with that, and probably realign the labor market and all that kind of stuff, because that's going to cause domestic sale demands across the supply side of the model, and so on and so on.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's really what this is about. So of course we'll be reviewing this in December to see where we come up with. I'm not even sure how much data is available at this point. I haven't looked in probably a few months now, but so we could certainly be off here. But this is what we're trying to accomplish, though, by using this variable to adjust for that. So yeah, I mean, if you want to get that stuff right on, you can certainly do that by making changes here. That's really what's important. But know that you're going to start affecting income. It's going to start affecting consumption. You're going to get, dynamic effects throughout the economy.
Yeah, no, that's good to know, kind of like what's going on kind of behind the model, because these types of questions do arise when we share this information with colleagues in the finance department. Those are the types of questions that they sometimes ask.
Yeah, I bet they do. Yeah. Anyways, I mean, the other issue was the estimate on all those payouts as well, right? We didn't know, the feds came out with their stuff this summer. That's when I think we did this stuff in August, because the July publication was the first time they came out with any of the numbers. And of course we did a simple extrapolation towards the end of the year. So given that the program was canceled or finalized, and then they did enhanced EI after that, we may be overstated in this case. So we'll have to review that stuff. But
yeah, I'm not sure if the economic update that the federal government released yesterday includes the CERB numbers by province. I'm pretty sure it includes the emergency wage subsidy by province.
I think so.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll be working that into our next outlook, try and get some of these numbers right. But again, if they're right or wrong, all you're affecting is the federal balance sheet here. This is, largely independent. This is really about playing finance minister and doing some forecasting on your bottom line, your net lending position here. As we get down to what is the deficit? Sorry, what is the deficit going to be like? That kind of stuff on a provincial basis in this case, of course. So you can see we're not at 300 billion here, or 350, whatever they came up with more recently.
And that money doesn't necessarily transfer to the market either.
Right.
So that the people have to realize, just because I give you $100, it doesn't. You're not going to go out and buy $100 worth of stuff. A lot of that will just go to savings, which gets reflected in your savings rate down below.
Exactly. Yes.
There.
Another interesting point of all that was probably the failure of the small business loan program, right? Because they made all that billion, like I can't remember what it was, so many billions available for small business loans, but nobody borrowed any of it.
Yeah.
The uptake rate was very, very small. That's because nobody wanted to be stuck with having to pay that back, even though they were giving you a 10,000 off of the 40 grand you borrow. So that was largely a failure, but that was also built into their summer projections, right? So, and it is a part. I'm not sure if the Parliamentary Budget Office did or incorporated that lack of outflow in their estimates when they've been updating regularly. I just can't keep up with it all. Too much information. So, but you can certainly control for all that stuff if you do have strong views and you want to get it as right as possible. Anyways, anything you want to control on the expenditure side, it's obviously all within this block. As we get down to the provincial revenue, so here we have, this is where you can deal directly with your retail sales tax. So I believe you guys are down at 7% now. Did you end up? I think you canceled the 6% drop, right? I believe that's what happened this year. It never occurred, right? So that's, we used to have a 6 in there. You can see the note.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So you can see the note here, but we had to turn that off. Yeah, you told us about that in the summer, remember? So that is no longer in the outlook. Right here, these are the large and small corporate rates. So what we do here, these are extended from the history. We should actually set this up as an update command, but you can impose these with update commands if you want to change the large business tax rate.
Yeah, like we'd probably have to work with especially like on the provincial side, we could probably get some of this data directly and kind of impose for the 2020.
One thing we do with these rates is, it's great. We have the rates directly. That's easy. The easy part. You need to know what share of businesses are small versus large in the model as well. So if you look at, I think that's what this share is right here, small business share for the corporate tax rate. So we look at the model, for example, because we have to weight them for the aggregate corporate rate. So here's your corporate tax rate equation here. And what this is doing is it's taking the small share times the small rate and 1 minus the small share times the large rate. So that's essentially your weighted corporate tax aggregate rate there. The rest of this stuff is all carbon taxes. So you don't have to worry about that. It's just a second component there, but you know what I mean? It is important to get that weighting correct if you have any information on that, what the share is. And I'm not sure what we have that set at, but 30% is the assumption right now, is the small business component. Okay, DX5. So these are most of the direct rates you can deal with for the provincial government right now. We'll talk about that education and anything else you guys want to model next, because I had some ideas there how we could, actually we could get into it right now if you want to. How are we doing for time here? You guys should be watching the clock for me.
10 o'clock. I don't know, what time did we schedule the break for? Was it 10 or 10:30?
It's 10:30. Okay, we got half an hour.
Okay.
Let's go another 30 minutes. Great. Okay, anyways, so what I wanted to talk to you about was you were saying we would like to do work on the education tax, possible changes in the education tax. So,
yeah.
Excuse me. The way to do that, of course, we're going to have to get some special information to work on that. I know that the provincial economic accounts provide education taxes as a line item in them. I'm not sure exactly what that is. And let me just pull up, I think, do I have it open right now? I do. So here's the Canadian table. So if you look at taxes on production, for example, we have real property taxes. Oops, 1 second. Turn that on. I don't see the education tax component. So, but this doesn't really matter because you guys would want it on a public accounts basis, more likely, anyways. I would think that would be more appropriate for you so that it can work with your tax numbers rather than, because of course the economic accounts have a different accounting framework. You know, and we're not even quite sure what is actually in that and how they reconcile that with the public accounts data. And it's also on a calendar year, whereas you guys are dealing with fiscal year data for your purposes. So
I just had that conversation with Narendra a few weeks ago, telling him that there's like economic accounts and public accounts are totally different.
Right, exactly.
So,
yeah. So sorry, go ahead, David.
That's it. It's just, you know, so I don't know how they make like the linkages between the two, because
Yeah.
you know, I think they try to, but I don't think they understand the public account side. But
Right.
There, sorry.
We never have either, but we don't do too much work in this space. Typically, most of our customers, the finance departments, do it all in-house, and we're not quite sure exactly what they're up to, just because they don't you know, we don't get the we don't sign non-disclosure agreements and things like that typically to get access to that information. So. But what you would need to do here, if you want to try and we could definitely incorporate that these components into the model. But when it comes down to is you're going to need to know what is your tax base, right? On determining education taxes, it's basically a mill rate times the value of property, right? And those valuations on the property would be done by the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, the MPAC stuff. So you need to know, and which obviously does not necessarily in any way link up with our capital stock valuation, right? Any of the stuff that comes out of these models. So first thing you'd have to investigate to do that type of, or implement that type of stuff into our model, and you know, we'd be happy to do it for you. Is to get us a tax base. What is your tax base? Also, what are your education revenues, right? And secondly, sort of how are those revenues collected in Manitoba? Because I know in most provinces, from what I understand, is they're collected through the municipalities and then remitted to the provincial government, right? I'm not sure if that's the same case for Manitoba.
So Aaron, sorry, I got a question for you on there.
Yes.
So I mean, yeah, like the education tax work that's being done is, I mean, it's fairly complicated. It's not that simple. And I think that if we're looking at a project like that, it would probably have to be something where we obviously would involve our taxation analysis branch.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
You have the details, but then I think that, and I'm just throwing this out there I don't think that we would try to tackle this. I think that's an exercise that maybe we would sort of, you know, work with you to sort of implement something that detailed, because the government would probably, you know, they would want to publish that information. They wouldn't want to keep it internal, right?
Right.
That's a good point.
Anyways, that's just a side note. So I think that, you know,
Okay.
given the complexities of the entire education tax work that's going on, it's something that we probably put in the back burner to say, okay, we can maybe look at this in more detail and use this as a project to bring you in and work with us to help sort of run that type of analysis.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
I'm just throwing it out there. I don't want to I don't want to gloss over it for that reason, but do you guys agree with that, or?
I would, yeah. I mean, we'd be happy to help you if you're talking to me, Mike.
Well, yeah, given that it was I think a campaign promise that the Conservatives made, so I tend to agree that they might be interested in publishing the results from the forecast. So, and given its complexities as well, you guys might be best suited to kind of, collect the data, work with our taxation folks, and do the modeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we would be involved, but I think that because this is just in the initial stages of us sort of looking at this and seeing what we can do in terms of simulation, I think that's one that's a bit more complex and that has a lot more repercussions. So I'd want to involve you guys. And I think that that's not an issue given our connections with the DM now and the work that you guys are doing. So anyways, sorry.
No problem. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it just goes back. We can model anything. We need to know how the taxation system works, and we need a tax base. We just need to know the details. That's it. I mean, you can build a model of anything there is really on a taxation side. Getting drivers is another challenge though for that type of stuff. So you'd have to use some type of proxy from what's in the economic data. It's just, and again, you'd have to investigate that as well, right? What is it? Is it relevant? Is it appropriate? I guess is the question for by using capital stock numbers or that type of stuff. There's lots of issues there. Maybe isolating machinery and equipment out of there, is that included as well, right? There's lots of things to consider on how you would model that type of stuff, and every tax component is very different. So same type of issues. We just had this question, like I said, probably yesterday, about the alcohol liquor taxes in Alberta, and then the gas tax. They want to know that kind of stuff. So again, you have to be able to isolate the consumption categories for those components. So again, it typically goes back to having access to data, access to information in general, to be able to do that stuff and then model it and make assumptions about where those spending categories are going, link them up to some component of the model. So it's certainly possible, but you need the data. That's all there is to it. Okay, so we keep going here, unless there's any other comments about that. We also have our royalty adjustment factors. You can deal with that kind of stuff. Basically anything on the revenue side that's included in the system, as you know, you can control for it in here, making adjustments if anything special is happening in a specific year. I don't think there's really, as you can see, everything is really just pulling the historical rates from the last value. So we are holding most of these assumptions constant. Not a lot of changes here, unless you really need to control for something that is occurring on a revenue side. When you get into the provincial expenditures, now the most used component here is on our what we call the rate of government consumption of goods and services, the RGCGS. So this is where we're dealing with operational spending for health, education, and government services, and these are our real per capita growth rates for these components. So this 18, that wouldn't even be used because the economic account data is known. 19. So we actually have a database that we collect each year that's on the real government spending data that we incorporate in this stuff. So this probably isn't being used, but we just left them on there to look at. And then here you're controlling for where is the per capita spending going to go in the next few years. We would then override the general adjustment with current year adjustments. In this case, with the update commands as usual. This is about getting the more year by year tuning done, and this would be tuned in line with or these adjustments are these are not growth rates again. What we're doing is we're adjusting what comes out of the model based on per capita growth, right? So the per capita component here is, I'll show you the equation. It depends on what's happening to your population. For your school age population, in this case, on the education side, And also on the health side, it's our DPHS, that health, that high weighted health population that we've built into the system here. So those are the per capita drivers here. And then per capita expenditure gains or reductions, whatever you're trying to do. And then we control for current year stuff based on whatever comes out of your budget plan. So that's Brett, who was modeling this. This is what he was trying to do here. Basically just trying to give a little boost to education. Obviously the number wasn't coming out right, and that could be because the school age population was coming down or something like that, and you wanted to flatline it. Whatever the case is, that's all you're trying to do here. So you can control the next couple of years if you have a spending plan published, or whatever you guys are trying to do there. Of course, it's up to you. As we go on, we also, sometimes you'll see date range adjustments. In this case, for Manitoba, you do. And this is where we try to make assumptions about looking at the provincial balance sheet, right? If you're running into some tough times, we can sometimes make assumptions that some of the per capita growth might slow down, trying to sort of take the pressure off expenditures and things like that. So that's all this is really about. You can control for different date ranges and periods, making assumptions about where that goes. But you know, given that, again, I showed you that the education and the health and the government side, current spending, given that it's all operational spending is largely wages and salaries, when you slow this spending down, you're slowing down job gains, and vice versa if you speed it up. So it's that's really how this works. But this is where you would make those adjustments to the current spending plan by sector. And this stuff will come through in your GovProf table. Oops, move forward here. Oh, way too far. So past the revenues into the expenditures, and here you go. So these are the real health, education, and public administrative spending. So these are meant to be, what we do is we take your budget plan typically, and we try to take inflation and an inflation assumption out of it, because the budget of course is nominal. There's also situations where we sometimes don't follow the budget as much as possible because you know, especially in Ontario's case, we don't believe the budget plan. So we just said, look, you can't do this. You're gutting the economy. You know, we got the Ford government in now, and they wanted some pretty heavy reductions. You look at Kenny out in Alberta, gutting the health services industry, same type of stuff. So you know, we try to get some representation in here. But if you guys want to get something, if you're politically mandated to show the actual government budget plan on the expenditures, then you can certainly adjust these as you see fit. And then make assumptions about productivity for these industries if you don't want to see the jobs move in a certain way. It's of course up to you, but it can all be controlled for.
Aaron, did you say these values are in nominal dollars, or are these real?
These are nominal. All the government
Nominal.
accounts are in nominal. Yes.
Yeah, this issue has come up in the past where, you know, we're comparing some of the information in your model to the budget document, right?
Right.
And the spending on health will be different because in the budget document there's no public admin category. So I presume,
right.
Because you're using the budgetary balance sheet and the economic accounts, right? So
Correct.
some of that health spending is being allocated to public administration.
Probably, yeah.
So
we have a tough time with all that stuff as well. You know,
Yeah.
there's some budgets present it by function, some present it by you know, this, that, by department. So we're trying to do the best we can with what's publicly available.
totally, yeah.
Right. So of course, if you guys know better, then it's all here to control for you. But know that, you know, all government accounts are in nominal dollars in this case, right? all of the government revenues and expenditures are presented in nominal dollars. They don't have it. The best you can do is apply general deflators, but that's not necessarily going to be right in any way either. So, okay, so other than the current spending profiles, down to our transfer payments, RGTs, government transfers to persons in this case, GTB, government transfers to business. So from the province, that's the last P on there. Way to read these variables. And then we also have government transfers to the municipalities, things like that. Aboriginal government transfers, transfer to the Aboriginal governments, I should say. So basically all of your components of the economic account categories and anything you see in the model, you're just dealing with that here. And again, same stuff, a lot of last value assumptions, just holding these proportions constant through the forecast period unless there's some major change announced, something that you would know about. On the municipal government side here, we get the local CPP side of things. Really just, rate taxes, indirect tax rates from the municipalities. So I'm talking about parking tickets, all the different revenue types they collect. So I guess I think the property taxes would fall under here in the other tax component, things like that. If you're familiar with your definition, you can get the economic account documents and read through them to understand what's a factor in each component. But same stuff, we're assuming the proportions are generally the same as we go through the forecast period. And on the local expenditures, just a bunch of different components. We also have the local current spending component. So they, of course, the local governments are only spending on administrative services and also on schools outside of the universities, right? So the primary and secondary school and that type of stuff. So that's why we differentiated that school age population, if you remember yesterday, for the primary and secondary schools versus the university age type students to deal with the provincial drivers. And then again, get into your transfers to households. A lot of these are sometimes zero categories and not even relevant, but they are there. So we have ratios for them. And the government sector that we're not even sure what to do with in some cases, but it is relatively small. The Aboriginal stuff, government stuff, where in some cases we don't even have drivers for certain components. It's been very, we put it into the model, but it has been a challenge to get any good representation there. And on the revenue side for the Aboriginal governments, and then of course we get into the CPP stuff. So if you want to try to control for Canada pension adjustments and things like that, it's all dealt with at the bottom here. Okay. So the next stuff we have are these are just taxable proportion extensions. So these are on the final demand components. And if you can read past the TRs, you can see the consumer durables, non-durables, semi-durables, services, government current spending, government investment, machinery and equipment, non-residential construction, and the residential construction. So we have these effective tax rates and then your taxable proportion information. So this is these are all computed using the input-output framework. You can get the special tax tables of the IO. You may have seen some of that stuff where you can then do some work on isolating PST and GST numbers to get what proportion of these expenditures are taxable. So that's all you're looking at here. And then we are extending some of the other proportions that are coming in. These are the federal rates with the F on the end, and these are the provincial ones down here. So, and the final section in here will be on the carbon taxes. So The way I've set this up, there's just a switch whether you want there to be federal taxes or not. I have them both to on because it doesn't matter, because the switch multiplies times the rate. So if you don't have a price for carbon, you don't have any revenue being collected, and it doesn't impact energy prices, that kind of stuff in the model, through the cost model, through the revenue equations for the government, through the tax equations, all that kind of stuff. If you don't have a price, it's not in there. So here we're using the federal backstop assumption. So this is the federal carbon price, tax rate, carbon tax, federal, Canada, how to read that variable, looking at $20 per ton, 30, 40, increasing to $50 per ton by 2022. And then we are extending that rate, flatlining it at $50 per ton from 23 and on right now, given that there hasn't been any announcement on further increases yet. We then get into the emissions. So these are what we call coverage ratios now. So we worked with the, we do work with the Canada Energy Regulator on this stuff. And basically, this is a broad assumption. So these coverage ratios are being every industry right now. They just haven't done the work on how much of a sector's carbon production is taxable, especially on an industry basis to link up with this type of a model. So what we are doing is just doing a blanket coverage ratio, and that's really to tune the revenue that's been collected thus far. I think that's how they did it. So this basically what this does, it says tax rate times coverage ratio times emission output. So it scales down the amount of emissions produced by every sector that is taxable in this case. We then extend that value all the way to the end of the forecast to 2050. So that's all that's happening here. It's a relatively simple assumption at this point, but it does line up the revenues pretty well in this case. And then as you go down, you guys probably won't have to play with this stuff unless you want to. You can give us a call for some guidance on it if you're interested. And what we also do with it is there's a revenue recycling component. So of course, the federal tax, they're giving tax rebates back in your income tax when you file your income taxes each year as the federal carbon tax rebate. So we don't have good detail on this, but again, we work with the CER on this type of modeling, and we are assuming that 2/3 of the carbon tax are going back to households through personal income tax reductions at the federal rate. So if you look at this variable, for example, in the model, it gets into the federal direct tax equation, and it takes a share of that carbon tax money, and it basically it gives it back, so it reduces your direct taxes. So that's all that's about. It's an offset to your personal income taxes paid each year. That's the way this works. And then the remaining third goes into business tax reductions as well right now. That's how we're modeling it. So just know that kind of stuff is being considered in here at this point in time. I know they are using that additional funding for all kinds of programs, federal programs and things like that, not giving all of the money back. But that's really what we're trying to, the goal of this revenue recycling is about trying to offset some of those tax gain increases due to carbon, therefore reducing your costs somewhat, as was the intention of the program, of course. So.
By the way, I just want to say I love all of this stuff here, all of the work that you're doing on carbon pricing and energy modeling. I have a climate background, so.
Oh, great! Yeah.
My interest is in integrated energy economic models.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I know. We wish we could do more. It's I built this about 4 years ago, and it's been fun trying to model this stuff. But there's a big model called Energy 2020 that out of some guys in the United States that the federal government, Environment Canada, and CE are both using, leasing to do this type of stuff. And it's more of a process emissions model, but that we integrate that model with our macro system and iterative runs to feed back information to each other. And that's how we do the, I don't know if you're aware, we do the energy futures work for the Canada Energy Regulator.
Yeah, Robert was mentioning that to me the other day.
Right. Yeah, they just published their stuff last week. So they didn't mention us in the document, but so we'll have to talk about that. But we have to ask for credit every year, or else they don't even talk about us. Anyways, that's what we use. This model is actually being used for that work as well. And then the final component here is just on the emission stuff. So these are really just adjustment factors to assume that you're going to get energy efficiency gains on the capital that you use by industry. As you can see, we're not doing anything with them. They're just being set to 0 at this point. And we also have this is the electric power stuff. Okay, so our modeler Brett did some work on this. And we were trying to capture your energy mix, obviously to get, as you shut down that coal plant in Winnipeg there, we were trying to get a mix on what was being, which proportion of your electricity has been produced by coal generation versus renewables and that kind of stuff. So Brett has done a little bit of work on that. I think he's already got it's done in the update macros, given that plant is already phased out. But in the previous years, I think he was sort of hand coding this down a bit, looking to phase some of these things out. But that's all this is doing. If you look at these in the model, you'll see that they get into the emissions equations for electric power in this case. So we say which proportion's coal, and then look at the CO2 equivalent of what coal is being produced and that type of stuff. That's all. We're trying to get some type of representation because obviously coal produces significantly more CO2 emissions in this case. So that's all that you're looking at down there in this part of the model. Finally, these are just your the emission stuff. So here we're looking at all kinds of information. There's, I don't know if you have to be familiar with the data to really understand all this stuff. There's industrial processes, there's energy waste components, there's methane emissions and so forth from the agriculture sector. So we're extending a lot of these assumptions forward. There's emission factors, i.e. How much carbon comes out of a unit of oil and coal and that kind of stuff. So it's all built into this stuff. And it stays constant, of course. You will always get the same amount of carbon out of the average unit of coal and that kind of stuff. Fugitive emissions, all sorts of stuff in here. Basically, every component of what Environment Canada publishes, we have it built into here. And all these EFs are the emission factor pieces, dealing with CO2, CH4, and the N2O components. So. Stuff you don't have to worry about. You're never going to have to touch that part of it unless you're doing something probably outside your ask, day-to-day ask of you. So,
Aaron, are you familiar with the physical flow accounts from Statistics Canada?
A little bit, yes. I haven't done too much with them, but
so they have a GHG inventory by NAICS code. And they have 111 industries. So I find it's much easier to align with kind of your economic accounts when you're using that GHG inventory rather than Environment and Climate Change Canada's.
Okay, yeah. We were, on a side note, I guess, one time we were accidentally emailed some of those special accounts data by one of our customers. And it actually helped us calibrate some of our stuff. But, this emissions table here where we've allocated, we've taken all those process emissions and allocated them on an industry basis. we found that we got exactly the same answer based on those tables. So I think, you know, it's a very elaborate process trying to
Your
sort
totals
this.
are bang on, I can see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And we have done this, you know, putting it into an industry basis, it's unbelievable amount of custom modeling by hand. Put this here, put that there, custom allocations, and it differs by product. And just write straightforward system to do it. It's but we have already developed it, so now we just get the data each year and then just keep working with the same framework. So you should be well aligned on an industry basis. Okay, so final macro here, EX6. So really all this guy does is deals with the major project read-in information. So I'll go through it quickly and we can then take a break. Actually, maybe we should just take a break now. We're at almost at 10:30. So you guys want to pause for 15 minutes, stretch your legs, and we'll come back?
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
All right.
Works for me.
Okay, I'll see you at 10:45 then.
Very nice.